Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you are a hospital leader, a healthcare administrator, or a chief medical officer, you are in exactly the right place today. We're tackling something that is absolutely dominating your inbox, and probably your board meetings right now, and that is evaluating artificial intelligence, especially these emerging multi-agent AI systems in real high-stakes clinical settings. We're going to break down exactly how you move from just being impressed by a flashy software demo to actually confidently procuring tools that work safely for your patients.
Quick note right up front. This explainer is presented by Voxel Analytics LLC. What we are walking through today is a structured, highly practical toolkit designed specifically for hospital leaders to evaluate and purchase AI software. We're leaving the science fiction at the door today. Instead, we are strictly focused on three things: evidence, safety, and workflow integration.
All right, let's dive right into this. Here's our playbook for today to prep you for your next executive vendor meeting. First, beyond the AI hype. Second, AI in clinical workflows. Third, the procurement playbook. Then, interrogating the vendors. And finally, governance and team readiness.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Beyond the AI Hype.
So, we have all seen the overwhelming flood of AI tools hitting the healthcare market recently. But here's the reality. AI is no longer just some cool research experiment confined to a lab somewhere. It is a clinical reality right now. And because it's a reality, it requires intense, practical judgment from leadership teams like yours. The fundamental paradigm shift you have to make involves the questions you're asking. You know, the old question used to simply be, can AI detect cancer? But model accuracy alone, that is absolutely not enough for adoption anymore. The new, better question you gotta ask is, can AI improve cancer care safely in our specific setting? The future really belongs to institutions that stop to ask what evidence would actually justify their trust, their budget, and ultimately their responsibility. Let's do a really quick tour of the landscape just to ground all this theory in reality. AI is entering cancer care literally everywhere. In radiology, we're seeing it for earlier detection of lesions and prioritizing urgent cases. In pathology, it's assisting with biomarker prediction and digital quality control. We're seeing it pop up in genomics for therapy matching and heavily in clinical operations for things like documentation and referral routing. What's actually incredible here is how foundation models are extracting hidden patterns across routine workflows. They're connecting radiology, pathology, genomics, and clinical history all together. But as we're going to see, those connections absolutely must be validated before they ever touch your patients. Moving right along to Section 2, AI and clinical workflows. Seeing the operational reality is so crucial because, well, cancer decisions are uniquely complex. They often involve massive uncertainty, really high-stakes trade-offs, and fragmented data scattered all across different imaging, notes, and lab systems. In an environment like that, clinical context matters just as much as the AI model's output. Which brings us to a massive warning. Clinical value depends on implementation, not just innovation. Really isolate that thought for a second. AI tools can look absolutely flawless in a carefully controlled vendor demo, but they are notoriously fragile in practice. Their performance can drastically shift across different scanners, different tissue stains, and diverse patient populations. Honestly, if it isn't implemented well into the workflow, the innovation itself is basically useless. So, the real crux of the issue is understanding the vast difference between model performance and clinical trust. Model performance? That's just accuracy and demo speed. Clinical trust is a whole different ballgame. It requires calibration, like does the system actually know when it is uncertain? It requires generalizability. Does it work on your specific underrepresented populations? Usability. Does it naturally fit into your real clinical workflow? And accountability. Who takes the fall when the system is inevitably wrong? If you only focus on model performance, integrating these tools can actually create hidden burdens and brand new risks for your staff. All right, Section 3, the procurement playbook. Time to mentally shift from all that technical hype to a structured operational evaluation. This is the actionable rubric you need in your back pocket when sitting across the table from a software vendor. We can break this down into a simple rule of 3. Step 1, demand evidence. What exact clinical problem does this tool solve, and what's the data that actually supports it? Step 2, verify safety and generalizability. Was it validated on patients that look like yours? How does it hold up across different demographics? Step 3, ensure workflow integration. You have to demand evidence of a workflow benefit, not just proof that the algorithm is smart. What actually happens when the AI's recommendation completely conflicts with your lead clinician's judgment? And this brilliantly illustrates our next focus, Section 4, interrogating the vendors. You literally can't just nod along and accept their glossy brochures. You have to ask really specific, hard-hitting questions tailored to the exact AI domains you're evaluating. The safety checks you need vary wildly based on the technology. For radiology AI, you've got to ask which specific scanners, protocols, and institutions were used for the validation. For pathology AI, it's which tissue stains and prep protocols were tested. The physical variables really matter there. But for large language models and multi-agent systems, the game changes entirely. There, you need to ask, what sources does the system actually pull from, and are they current and fully auditable? Let's actually linger on large language models for a second, because this is important. LLMs can summarize records and assist in tumor board prep beautifully. They really can. But they can also sound incredibly confident, even when they are incomplete, completely outdated, or just entirely wrong. Honestly, interacting with some of these models is kind of like talking to a highly enthusiastic first-year medical student. They've read all the textbooks, but they haven't quite learned the boundaries of their own clinical knowledge yet. They generate these wonderfully fluent answers, but they definitely don't always cite real evidence. Which brings us to what might be the most stark, vital question of this entire explainer. Who reviews outputs before they affect patients? I really want you to pause and reflect on that one. We are stepping into an era of multi-agent workflows where frontier AI isn't just answering a prompt anymore. It's interrogating systems, detecting gaps, and actively coordinating actions across your entire hospital. If one agent retrieves the data, a second one summarizes it, and a third triggers a clinical action, man, small errors can propagate so rapidly. You absolutely must know who is keeping a human in the loop. Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, Governance and Team Readiness. This is all about the future and the human element. Because procuring the software, that's just step one. What happens immediately after the software is purchased and deployed? Well, you've got to build an AI-ready workforce. And look, the goal here is not to turn your clinicians into AI engineers, it's to create better evaluators and stewards. Clinicians must be the ones to define the problems, and they have to retain the absolute power to override AI outputs. Nurses and care teams, they are your frontline defense to identify workflow burdens and flag when a recommendation just doesn't match the reality of the patient in front of them. Policymakers and health leaders have to demand transparency. Bottom line, AI should be credentialed and continuously monitored exactly like a physical clinical instrument. Because AI performance can and will drift over time as your hospital's own protocols evolve. So, to wrap this up, AI can absolutely help cancer teams see further, act faster, and coordinate better. It's an incredible tool. But the greatest value is only unlocked through careful, trustworthy implementation. So my final challenge to you is this. Are you ready to govern what comes next? Because human judgment remains the absolute center of high-stakes cancer care. The future of AI in your hospital relies on wisdom, hard evidence, and real accountability, not just hype. Start refining your institutional governance today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.